Welcome to Pre-Shift, tidbits of wisdom for everyday service. My name is TJ Griffin, and I'm the corporate wine educator for Winebow. Your questions are welcome throughout the presentation, but please use the Q&A rather than the chat bar to submit them. Let me introduce your host, Winebow's Director of Wine Education and 29-year hospitality veteran, Ron Edwards. He is the husband of one wife, the father of 5 girls, a surfer, and a missionary kid. And now, here to discuss today's topic, training your staff, Master Sommelier Ron Edwards.
Well, hello, TJ, and everybody else out there. So glad you could join us today. How are you, TJ?
I'm great, Ron. How are you?
I cannot complain. The sun is shining. It's still warm enough not to wear a coat in Virginia, and I just think that's great. So let's see. What are we going to do today? We're going to train our staff. To quote Pinky and the Brain, same thing we do every day, right? Because that's how training is supposed to work in the hospitality trade, most assuredly, even if not everywhere else. And so let's get on the training train, so to speak, and get some of these principles down. All right, so the most important factor in your mental state towards training is realizing that you need partners. The success of a wine program, on a beverage program in general, is very related to the idea of partnership inside your facility. 1 or 2 people on your team, whether that's the sommelier and the manager, whether it's managers because you don't run the sommelier model, it's fine. But if there's only 1 or 2 people who are all sold and 100% in on this idea, then you are limited by the capabilities of 2 people instead of 10 people or 20 people or 40 people or however many staff you have, and depending on the size of your business. So the most successful way to engage and keep your business strong is by getting the entire front of the house sold out on beverage program, wine program. So, a fully informed staff will buy into this and be ready to be your holistic sales force. You want to create enthusiasts, not wine geeks. If a few geeks get in the mix, that's okay, but that can't be your goal because, one, most people that you're training don't want to be wine geeks, and the other is that enthusiasts share their information in a different way. It took me a long time to go from wine geek in the dining room to enthusiast in the dining room. And my guests react better to me when I'm an enthusiast, and they give me that eye roll and I don't know what you're talking about when I accidentally slip back into being a wine geek. So we really want to create enthusiasts, people who are just excited about what they have to offer and why they have it to offer. And that is also part and parcel to including them in training technique, because it's great to be able to talk the talk, but then you eventually have to serve the wine and be efficient and elegant in that regard. So create partners, get everybody on board. That's step number 1 in your focal point. The other reality of training, and I hate to make this sound like it sounds, but it's just reality, is it never stops. Effective training never stops. Even if you don't have staff turnover, which you will. I mean, the hospitality trade has tremendous staff turnover anyway. But even in those rare instances where you work for a company that people love to work for and the staff turnover is quite low by comparison, you still have to work in the realm of training never stops. And in that same mindset, you also have to work along the way of that range inside your staff. Think of it as, teaching public school, where you have a range of students in the classroom, and the idea is to get information to all of them. You can't just teach at the brightest student level, and you can't just teach at the student who's behind. You have to teach to the whole room. And when you are designing your training program and the way you're going to transfer information, you have to make sure that you are including everybody in that thought process. And remember that not everybody has the same learning style. So if you just pass out written information, there are plenty of people who are just not going to get it that way. If you just talk about it and it's only audio, a lot of people aren't going to connect with that. If you just taste wine at lineup, that's not going to connect the rest of the dots. So it really takes various forms and reiteration in different formats to really get the message across. So, it never stops. But I want to assure you that if you follow this mantra, it never stops, and I'm going to invest the time, you will see tremendous results. One of my, the reality of working in the hospitality trade is the front of the house, because it's the service environment, is not mentioned in a critic's review unless it's bad, right? So if you did your job and took good care of the critic, they probably aren't going to say anything. They're going to just talk about how great the food was, what have you. That's just the nature of the game. And it's okay because we're in the service industry and it's not supposed to be about us. But there was this wonderful moment in time when I was managing a restaurant and a critic came in and reviewed the restaurant and gave us very positive review for the environment in which we worked, and finally said something about the front of the house. And the comment was just this: young but savvy waitstaff. I can live with that, right? Because that said that they took good care of this person and they knew their menu and they knew the beverage program. And that's what we're really looking for, is a savvy waitstaff, someone who knows how to use the information at their disposal. And that's only going to happen when you train every day, every week, every month, every year, regardless of the audience. You up with me, TJ? We're good?
Yeah. Can I jump in with a question here?
Please.
And I apologize if you're going to cover this, and I'm also not sure how common it is anymore. But when I was in my restaurant career, we often had staff who were younger than 21 and in theory should not be drinking wine. So how do you train those staff?
Well, having been that, I know that people are going to be amazed by this, that a master sommelier, when he was of age, didn't drink. I didn't drink. I grew up in a prohibitionist house. So I was that staff that you had to train on the beverage program who had no interest in wine, did not connect with wine, and they still made the effort. And it's a much harder process that way. And you'll also deal with cultures that are great servers, but they're not alcohol in consuming cultures, right? So you don't just take them off the staff, you give them the tools, help them with words. You have to hand them the baby, as Madeline Truffaut always told me. So you can't expect them to come up with their own terminology about these things. You literally have to say, here's what you say about this Pinot Grigio when somebody asks, and they just need to memorize it. The issue that's important is not to say to yourself as a trainer, well, they just can't know this because age, culture, whatever. No, it's your job as the trainer to hold them accountable, and management's job to hold them accountable for the information and find a way to connect with them so that they can use it. Does that answer your question, TJ?
Yeah, that makes sense.
So for instance, one of my clients employed 2 of my underage daughters to wait tables in their daytime section of the restaurant. Same wine list, same beverage program, daytime and nighttime. And so those underage daughters still sat through wine class, still were given the notes that they were expected to memorize, still were expected to speak intelligibly about beverages on the wine list and on the beverage menu that guests asked about. It was less prolific at lunch, except during high tourist trade times when, a lot of people drank at lunch. So that's a great example of just real world reality. And another great example of that was staff at the Townsend Hotel. When I was consulting for them, several of the wait staff there were of a religious belief that alcohol was forbidden. They were happy to sell it, but they were never going to taste it. So we had to help them come up with words that they could use and confidently use those words to help their guests find what they're looking for. The time alone is not enough. So you can spend all the time you want with a book in your hand, but if you're not actively trying to learn what's in that book, you're not going to learn it, right? And I really love this quote. Ben Bergeron podcast was talking about a study that they talked about the 10,000 hour rule, right? This saying that goes around that if you invest 10,000 hours in a subject matter, you'll be an expert, or 10,000 hours in an activity, you'll be excellent at it. And what they found was what we would kind of intuitively know. It's not just the time, it's the quality of that time. So in the case of training your staff, if you spend 10,000 hours training your staff over the course of several years, but you don't put good quality effort in, then you won't get good quality out. You won't get a staff that's expert. You'll get something else instead. So it's not just about investing the time every day, every week, every month, every year. It's about investing a quality of time every week, every day, every month, every year. Because when you do quality, you don't need quantity as much. A really well invested 5 minutes is better than a poorly organized 25 minutes. So now let's talk about, all right, we're going to invest our time. We're going to do it wisely. We're going to try and find some proven tactics that fit into the strategy that we are going to work with. Now, each hospitality business is going to have to come up with their own strategy for training. And in that strategy, you're going to have to employ some tactics. And so I'm just going to give you some examples of tactics that have worked day in, day out for quite some time in this process, and let you think about that as an audience and say, okay, how can I use some of these or even all of these, right? So one of them is the one wine a day at pre-shift. So we'll start that here, right? Because that's what our webinar is called, right? Pre-shift. That's a very valuable 5 minutes on average, sometimes 10 in your business, that everybody knows they're coming together to get ready. They're getting ready for what's about to happen, how many guests we're supposed to have. And normally, pre-shift involves some sort of training. So I think one of the things that you need to consider as a tactic is one wine a day. Every day your restaurant is or hospitality business is open, where you let them taste it, you tell the story, and you pair it to a menu item or 2 or 3 or 5. One wine a day. And the immediate response to that is, that's too expensive. Well, it depends on how you've thought about it in advance. If this is part of your strategy and you're decided you want to implement it as a tactic, then adjust your pricing and your inventory to the idea that I'm going to open one wine a day with my team. That one wine a day doesn't have to be poured out among your staff. You could still offer it to people by the glass, or let people in the dining room taste it for free to try to get them into this new wine. There are ways to leverage that open bottle. And one of my favorite ways was when the invoice came in and I entered that wine into inventory. If it was a 12-bottle case and I knew that I was going to be following this process, I would divide the case by 11 bottles instead of 12. And that would then be the raw cost to the restaurant. So that when that one bottle got opened to train the staff, it was already absorbed in our cost margins. Social learning. What is social learning? So this is not a brand new term, and it's not talking about social media. Social learning is the learning that happens when people don't realize they're learning as they converse with each other in the workplace and in other places. So that conversation that's happening at the bar before the restaurant gets busy could be social learning if it's properly directed. You have some time. Hey, John and Sue, I need you to go over to the bar, and I'd like you to help the bartender open the wines that need to be poured today. What's that? That's social learning about the methodology of opening. One of the two of those people that you just designated knows the proper technique and is being sent over there to show the other one the proper technique and allow them to open them. The other thing that happens is, hey, I haven't tried this. What's this about? Oh, yeah, we tried that yesterday. These are my notes on it, and here's the information they passed along. All of these kind of things are social learning, but it has to be a benefit of an empowered, teamwork-oriented staff, where they feel like it isn't everybody else's responsibility to teach them, but it is a collective effort. And that can be reinforced every day at pre-shift, and it can be reinforced by a couple of other things that we're going to talk about this. When you, as a manager, praise the engaged individual who is offering knowledge to their team and engaged in the opportunities with their peers to teach them, praise it, acknowledge it. Somebody else will want that praise. They will go get some information. They will start to share it. That kind of learning is awesome because it's in context and it will be remembered, because I can say all day long to my children, for instance, they should not do this. It's dangerous. But if one of their peers says to them, man, you're crazy, that's dangerous, they're probably at this age going to take that more seriously than if dad says it. The same thing kind of happens in restaurants. When your fellow server says to you, that Pinot Grigio is great, or I sold that Cabernet last night and somebody just adored it. They ended up buying 6 glasses for the table of 3 people. It was fabulous. And here's what I said about it. And they loved it. And then that's going to connect with the other person. And pretty soon you're going to hear similar words being said at another table. And then there's the single source idea. And this is the hardest part, but it's so much more doable now than it used to be. Single source, when I was first managing restaurants, meant that you probably had to create an employee manual and you had to print it out and you hand it to everybody. If you wanted wine knowledge to be handed out, you either had to create it all in advance or figure out a way for them to have 3-ring binders and hand it out one at a time on paper. Now you can still do it that way. I mean, paper still exists and printers still exist. But we do have advantages now, like a corner of the website that's only accessible by our staff, or we send out digital updates. Here, replace your file on all our wines, whether it's a Word document or an Excel document or something even fancier than that. If you have the ability, maybe your restaurant or hotel is pretty tech savvy and can create a staff-driven or staff-only app that gives them all the things they need in their hand. These are all realities of what to do. But the most important factor is that everybody in the restaurant or the hotel knows, if I need to know anything about our beverage program, I go here and I find what I'm looking for. That would be everything from what's on the list, what's been taken off the list, how to pronounce the wine, what grapes are in it, what the description should be, what food items it pairs with, everything in one place, one single source of information. Wasn't that many years ago when it was too clunky for me to guarantee that everybody could open a spreadsheet that I emailed them on their phone, because Excel isn't on everybody's phone and it wasn't mobile friendly at the time. I created, a mail merge program that would take my Excel descriptions and put them on a 3x5 note card that was perforated. And then I handed out the note cards as complete sets with those craft rings and hole punch them. And I expected the staff to bring that ring of note cards with them in their apron, especially in the lunch staff that was less experienced. Bring that with you. If somebody asks you a question, you have the answer. Don't pull it out at the table, but I'll check on that. I'll be right back. And you can come back to the table with a real answer for them. In the reality now of digital, as long as phones are not forbidden on the dining room floor, which they shouldn't be used inappropriately, but if you allow them for the right reasons, then their phone gives them access to stuff that you want them to have. Keep it simple. Whatever you're supplying to them, keep it simple. Fully distill it. Talk about the region, the important grape, and how it relates to other known wines. And then anything else after that is for further admonition, but making sure that they can relate a Sirtico to Chardonnay and Sauvignon Blanc and Riesling, or Chardonnay and Sauvignon Blanc alone, will give them an opportunity to share that knowledge with someone who would not have asked otherwise. So make sure that it's relatable to other subjects.
Oh, this looks like you might be covering my question. I was going to ask you, what about outside people like distributor sales reps coming in to do staff trainings? Because that's fairly common.
It is fairly common because most restaurant management is too busy to come up with their own training program, or they came up with it, but they're too busy to implement it. That's just reality. It's an unfortunate reality, but it is an advantage for us in this wholesale trade. As a business owner, I would encourage you to call the right rep. And I don't mean that to be overly exclusive, but not every sales rep that calls on you is going to be a good person to train your staff, right? You're placing a very valuable commodity in their hand. and allowing them to execute something that is very specific and very unique to you. So make sure they come prepared. Reinforce to them exactly what you want them to talk about, train about. Make sure you know exactly how much time between the two of you. You have 10 minutes, not 1 minute more. You have the opportunity to talk to 10 of my staff, etc. I want you to please bring a sample. We sample a wine every day at lineup. Whatever the rules are, make sure that they know them very clearly, and make sure that they know what you expect. Is brand education enough for your team? Meaning, I do not want the rep to try and educate on any core wine region information, like what is Chablis. I want them to just talk about Louis Moreau Chablis, the family, the story, things they can tell at the table that are not discrete wine facts. Make sure they're understanding that. In my restaurants, I wanted both. If you were going to come in and talk to my staff, that's fine. You can come in. I know you're going to tell the brand story, but I want you to communicate about the background, about Chablis. Where is it? What kind of grapes are grown there? Why is this a good example of that? Because normally you expect this out of Chablis. Now let's taste our Louis Moreau Chablis. And I hope you find that this is exactly what I said it was going to be. That sort of thing was fine with the sales rep. It wasn't very many times that I engaged in the sales rep training version, but that's because I was a geek on my own right. And I took full ownership of that process with my staff. That was just my choice. It's not the only way to do it. It's just the way I did it. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does.
All righty. Let's talk about technique. Because all of that other stuff that we just talked about is really about getting core wine information into their brains in a way that they can talk about it, so that if somebody says, if they were, for instance, if they wanted to sell somebody a bottle of Chablis that had asked for Chardonnay, they would lead the introduction with, yes, I have a Chardonnay for you. And this one is from a French region called Chablis. Here's what to expect out of it. I mean, that would be ideal, but that takes the background knowledge to go there, right? Otherwise, you have a staff full of order takers, which will allow people to get wine on the table, but it will not add to your sales as much as it would otherwise. Order takers are not the same experience overall as someone who comes in and takes charge of your evening or your lunch and makes sure you have a better time than you even thought you were going to have. So training techniques. So here's the deal. You have to show them the best. You have to demonstrate proper methods yourself or whoever's designated as the trainer. You have to always use proper methods yourself when you're in the dining room. Now, proper methods does not mean that you have to have the absolute formal service standard, because that might not fit your dining room. But it does mean that whatever your maximum expectation is for your dining room, you demonstrate it and you practice it, because they're never going to do it better than you. Right? They're just going to, hopefully they're going to come up and meet you at your standard, but they're not going to take your standard and then go, oh, I'm going to do it a step above that. That just isn't going to happen. Offer practice opportunities, because just telling them how to do it is not going to get it done. Somebody needs to open that pre-shift wine every day, and they need to do it the right way with guidance. Somebody needs to help open those bubbles at the bar for cocktail needs and for wine by the glass. Somebody other than the bartender needs to do that. Opening wines for the by the glass program for practice. Somebody on the wait staff needs to do that. Not because the bartender's incapable, but because the more they practice, the better off they're going to be. Offer mock service opportunities at pre-shift once in a while, where the one person opening the wine that you're planning to taste is actually demonstrating it at a table that will then be reset for service. All of these are great opportunities. And then once in a while, have a little mock service exam. You as the manager, sit down at a table, and once a week, somebody on the wait staff has to go through service progression for you so that you can see what they actually do. I promise you, if they're able to walk over and overcome their nerves and give you proper service progression for your dining room, you don't have to worry about what they do with the guest. And that's a beautiful thing. I instituted that as, you can't go on the dining room floor here unless you can wait on me and pass. And it was a good practice. It made sure that I didn't have that, oh, they've only been in training for 2 days on the dining room, you'll have to forgive them kind of scenario. Expect the best. In your technique, expect the best. Never apologize for holding your staff and yourself to a standard. Decide the standard and then hold yourself and everybody else to it. Never, ever accept a lower standard. Whether it doesn't matter how busy you are, doesn't matter that the world's falling apart, never accept a lower standard, because if you accept it once, it starts to become more regular after that. And more important than any of that is praise on a regular basis, as often as you can, every day, good technique to the employee who did it in front of their peers. That is the strongest way to reinforce and promote and make sure that good technique is being used across the board. Love to see you carrying that tray. Thank you for clearing that table with a tray. That was an excellent champagne opening. Way to go. Nice job getting that bucket before you got to the table. Whatever it takes to make sure that everybody knows you're watching and that you're willing to tell them when they're doing a good job. The biggest problem in most hospitality facilities is that we are so busy as managers that we only critique and we don't often compliment. And that is just a nature that we have to overcome.
So now would be a good time, if anyone has any questions, to use the Q&A bar. But I have a question, Ron, and this might be too broad, and I apologize. We can do it some other time if it is. But you alluded to this. There are varying levels of formal service. In your opinion, what are the minimums? Like, what's the basics that you just have to have, and every service staff should know? Like, what are your must include things?
In the case of wine service, every server needs to know how to cleanly, properly open a bottle of wine. Whether you're using a paper serviette or linen serviette, to open it, clean it, present it, no drips. And that means cutting the foil in the right place, opening it without making a big pop, not sitting it on the table while you're opening it, that sort of thing. Everybody, if you're going to serve wine, your entire staff needs to be able to do that with a certain amount of style. And then as you go up the ladder of service progression, then you can start bringing in the idea of decanting and all of that other stuff. But there are some minimums. If you are going to have sparkling wine on your menu, then everybody in the dining room needs to know how to open it safely, cleanly, and properly. And what most people, the mistake most people make is an honest mistake, because they've been trained improperly, and that is that they take the cage off before they pull the cork out, which is like taking the pin out of the grenade and then walking around with it, waiting for it to explode. Just not a good idea. So those kind of things are absolute minimums. I think body posture is an absolute minimum. If you can't reach the guest on their right side to pour with your right hand, then reach them from the left and pour with your left hand. It doesn't matter the level of dining. There's never an excuse to put your elbow in somebody's face. That's just bad practice. Sometimes I guess, I don't mean it to sound overly negative, but if you've been trained to do it better, then it's laziness. If you've never been trained, then you just don't know. It's an ignorance factor. But those are kind of the minimums. Being kind to guests is always a minimum. Things like that.
Yeah, that makes sense. Especially the sparkling wine. I know that's a scary thing for a lot of people, but I remember many years ago taking off the cage in a hotel lobby as I was talking to someone, and the cork shot across the lobby, hit the ceiling. Luckily, no one was injured, but I've been very careful ever since. Yep.
Maybe the third or fourth bottle I ever opened, nobody had really shown me in detail how to do it. And the cork bounced off the ceiling above the booth and then landed on the table on some of the plateware, made a big racket and a noise. And I was embarrassed beyond belief. And it took many, many years before any other incidences happened with a bottle of sparkling wine after that. But they happened, right? I had passed the Master Sommelier exam a decade before, and I was opening a bottle of sparkling wine in a dining room in a busy night, and the bottle was wet and slippery, and I really don't exactly know what happened, but somehow it got out of my lower grip hand and just went straight to the floor, on a hardwood floor. And I thought, oh my gosh, it's just going to explode. I was very grateful that I bent over fast enough to grab it when it bounced on the, on the outside ring of the butt of the bottle, and bounced up just enough for me to grab the neck, and then just let it spray all over all over me instead of the rest of the dining room. But that, things happen, but it wasn't because I was using bad technique. Just accidents happen, but we need to avoid those as much as possible.
So our next pre-shift is on December 1st. It's going to be December.
I know, it's frightening.
So be here for that. December 1st, 3 p.m. A very important topic: food and wine pairing. That's probably going to have a lot in that webinar, Ron.
Yes, I will try not to overthink it, as is my habit, and I will try to boil it down to some basic principles. And I'm quite certain that we will come about with a better approach to it than maybe we came in, and we'll see what happens from there.
We have one quick question, and it's a good one that I didn't think of. Top tips to overcome nerves serving at tableside.
The first and foremost tip is to get to a point that you feel authoritative in your dining room. And what I mean by that is invest the upfront work in your menu knowledge, in your beverage menu knowledge, and in learning your craft. When you know your craft and when you know your book knowledge, quote unquote, it's less likely for you to be nervous at the table. But if you are a person that just is kind of nervous talking to people, you may always have that. And so it's just like, I don't know. It's hard for me to imagine it. I got nervous at very few tables, and it was the tables that I knew I was walking into conflict that made me nervous, and they still do, because you always want to try and solve the conflict. You're always wondering if you're going to say the right thing to diffuse it, or if it's going to get even louder, et cetera. But I think the first step, if there's anything you can control about being nervous at a table, is do the best you can to master your craft inside that building. No one is absolute master of the craft in every building, because every wine list is different, every menu is different, and that sort of thing. But inside your immediate environment, you can become the master of that domain, and that will solve a lot of the nerves.
We have a very 2020 question from Jeff. Any tips for doing remote / virtual trainings? Do your best. Webinars are not ideal, as you will know from being in the audience for this. You need to do it in a meeting format where you have plenty of opportunity for people to ask questions. You need to call on people in the meeting, bring them into the conversation. The first time you call on somebody unexpectedly, everybody goes on alert because they might be next. That's a huge issue in digital training. And the other is to keep it as contextual as possible so that they feel like it applies to them, and which means you need some research and development around the business that you're talking to, so that it's not as general, perhaps, as what you just heard from me. I'm doing this for whoever might listen to it, regardless of the business they own. But if I was doing it for a specific business and a specific staff, then I would have much more pointed commentary about what they need to know about the subject I'm trying to teach. I think those are two very important tricks. If you're really adept at using Zoom breakout rooms or something like that, and it's a long training, that's a good idea. I think also the other 2020-ism is to keep your digital trainings short, because the attention span goes really fast. Yes, it's tougher than live, definitely. All right. So we'll see you in 2 weeks on December 1st at 3 p.m., same channel, for pre-shift food and wine pairing. Until then, stay safe, everybody. I guess I should say happy Thanksgiving, because we won't see you till after happy Thanksgiving. Happy Thanksgiving to you, Ron.
Thank you very much, and to you.
And thanks for attending. We'll see you next time.
See you later, everybody.